Today I'm gonna recap round 6 of this tournament in Portugal. If you haven't seen how much I've scored so far, I highly suggest you go see those videos in a row. They're all labeled day 1 through day 5. This is day 6. I'm up against my third 0-rated Portuguese player in this tournament. Portuguese chess fact of the day. The second or third oldest game ever played, ever recorded in the history of chess has been played by a Portuguese player called Pedro Damião, who played a game in 1590 against unknown opponents twice. If you want to see that game, it is a very crazy game. I'll need 2K likes on this video. If we don't reach it, it's okay. It's not the end of the world, but that's your chess fact, Portuguese chess fact of the day. Let's get into this game. I have the black pieces against my 0-rated opponent. So these are always wild cards. I don't know what he plays. I don't know how much he has online. I can't find anything on this person. My opponent goes with G3. And so exactly as I'm telling you, I end up being a little bit clueless from right out of the opening because I don't know this guy. So I just go with my typical knight f6 and then d5. So just playing against this light squared bishop with my knight and pawn and eventually putting on a very nice light square pawn structure just to play against that bishop. d3, bishop f5, and then c4. The plan here is I'm taking my bishop outside of my pawn structure before I can close up that pawn structure and have my bishop in front of it so it can live happily ever after. I go with c6, again playing against the grain of this bishop, very important. Queen b3, and now I start to get scared because queen b3 hits d5, hits b7. And although a lot of moves are fine for me here, it's scary to play against this. I have to either go with a b6 and go against my plan of playing against the grain of this bishop, just making it a step easier for my opponent to achieve a very nice bishop, or I play defensively with a bad move like queen d7. Queen d7 defends b7 effectively, but really just gives a free tempo to the white pieces, which my opponent missed, okay? So my opponent here has like knight f3, to go on this e5 square, take it for themselves, and attack my queen with tempo on it. But my opponent goes takes. And takes is a very liberating move. This is relief in a tournament game when you're playing against a 0-rated, everything's on the line. You're live streaming it on Twitch. You are facing a potential huge embarrassment, right? So this was key, because now, if you go knight f3, I have liberated the c6 square and can go knight c6, taking up the e5 square. But my opponent goes bishop g5. I didn't expect this move at all. And this is like the third time in the midst of 6 moves that I've been surprised by my opponent's move. So bishop g5, after I develop e6, as I need to develop my bishop, right? Free my bishop's way. Well, then they just double pawns. My opponent goes e4, and this is pretty good. Yeah, I'll agree with the fact that it's pretty good. Why? Because it jams my bishop. So after takes and bishop g6, my bishop is absolutely tanked on g6. And yeah, guy has no activity. Okay, so knight c3 is played. Development move, and also scary rook d1 things, but I calculated through, and here knight d2, bishop c5. I can develop finally, and then rook d1, queen e7, and we're fine. A little bit more accurate by my opponent would have been rook d1 before I have a bishop on c5, because now queen e7 is not possible because it kind of frictions with my bishop on f8. I have a lot of bugs on me. Like, this is not the cornfield number 1 is better than this cornfield. This cornfield sucks. Okay, so knight e2, I go bishop c5. Rook d1, I have to move my queen to e7. I don't like c7. It's just like waiting to be x-rayed on this file, I feel like. And on c7, you're a target to knight b5, things on tempo, and the knight could go to d6 potentially. Like, I don't like all of those things. So the queen is really properly refuged on e7. And now castles, I actually go with castles. So there are problems with this. If white wants to start up an attack, they're free to do so. And this happened in the game. And it's scary for my bishop. Knight a4 ensues. I go back with my bishop. Okay, although my position doesn't look really good, I acknowledge that, I know this. This is the thing. I have the bishop pair. That's the only thing I have, okay? I don't have space. I don't have the pawn structure. I don't have better active pieces. I have the bishop pair. If I can conserve that bishop pair and use it in the end game, that would be incredible. Though moves like f4 make me think that I won't have a bishop pair to hold on to. Okay, so f4, kind of threatening f5, some scary stuff. This bishop is looking not too good, and it's a good move, but the thing is, it's really bad for this king. Like, my opponent was really not acknowledging that this diagonal is just open, and the dark squares are something that he has a very big trouble of controlling. My opponent has traded off his dark square bishop. So that's a no-no. Okay, I go bishop h5. You know when you calculate only one thing for your opponent and then it comes to bite you? This is exactly what happened. It's a really nice pin on this knight, and knight and rook here on d1, and basically it forces bishop f3. Right after I played my move, it's like the inner voice, like right after I played my move, I was like, did I blunder? Did I really just blunder right now? It's exactly what went through my head, because it allows g4. g4 is a brilliant move in my opinion, it's so nice. g4 aims to trap my bishop, and if I take, there's this longitudinal queen g3, which pins my bishop, and on a defense here, then you can absolute pin my bishop with your last pawn that can attack my bishop properly. And here I would lose a piece and the game. Thankfully, I saw this resource during the game, which would not be entirely dead. Okay, but yeah, I have b5. It's a really interesting resource. Okay, of course, white have the impossible e5 to find, but look, if you simply take my bishop, I give a pawn, and it's not the end of the world. Yes, I'm losing on the board. Yes, it's over positionally, but against a zero-rated player, I think I can muster at least a draw, and if I get lucky, a win. If the knight decides to go back and you think you're still trapping my bishop, bishop takes g4, and now you don't have queen g3 anymore. If you take my free pawn and attack my knight and my bishop, bishop takes g4, and not only do you not have queen g3, if you take my free knight here, you stop defending yours, and I have bishop takes e2. Oh, I actually lose a piece. Oh. So it would be like, okay, so they win a piece here, but then I win the exchange, and it's a knight and bishop against rook. But anyways, I was prepared against bishop f3, which is what he played in 2 minutes. So, end of the day, no harm. Well, harm indeed, but no foul, okay? The referee was not present in that decision making. So bishop takes, queen takes, and it's still very serious. I mean, white are coming in with a convincing attack from a superior position. I go rook d8, and here my entire spiel is that I'm counter-attacking the white pieces and blocking that attack with counter-attacking chances. Queen h5, and now it gets serious because now g4, g5 is coming in, and it's the brewing of an attack. And legit here, after g4, I have another scary moment in this game. Like, this game was like scary because if I play b5 to win the c5 square, right? So like knight c3, bishop c5, and I trade rooks and I'm good, white can come up with rook f3, which I need to calculate. And if I take this, I lose on the spot to rook h3. So here I play it anyways. Because on rook f3, I had seen, okay, bishop takes f4 is legit winning, but I had seen queen a7. I want to say, no, I had seen f5. Crazy move, f5. And f5 has per idea to clear the f6 square. And if you go like this immediately, I have f6 to defend here right on time. Right on time. But if not, like if you take something, you know, I can just take your knight. So your knight would have to move here, and then I have this prepared with this. On b5, however, my opponent goes for a surprise move. I didn't see this at all, you guys. Rook c1. It's like the 4th time in this game that I miss a lot of things, that I miss something. And it's not the last time. I'm just gonna say that right now. So I go queen a7 check first. Check keys on the king. I told you about these weak dark squares. That's what's going on here. Queen a7 check. King goes to g2. The best line, I think, is taking. And then after rook takes, then queen e3. But I played queen e3 directly. So look, it's a really nice looking move, right? The queen is hitting the knight, it's hitting the pawn, a little bit of wine, cheese, you know? But then this allows, because I've kept the knights on the board, this allows knight ac3, defending everything, and just kicking my queen next move. This rook kicks my queen and attacks h7. So here I have to find knight d4, which I actually had once I saw knight ac3 after I played queen e3. So thank God I saved myself. But yeah, knight d4 takes up f3, and if you take, I take, and then rook f3, would blunder to queen d2, and I win the rook here on c1. So queen e3, he didn't find it, he played knight g3, and this gives the f4 pawn, but also this gives queen d2, which I missed. Queen d2 is really fire, because it's the first time I check the king and they can't block like this, because I just take the rook. Now I just took this immediately. Now rook c3, the rook is off of c1, so after check, you can do rook f2, and I can't take your rook now. So you see how the slight detail, like this most minuscule detail, a check first before taking a pawn, is a lot. Because now I move back my queen, and it is white to play. Okay, he plays this, which is a blunder, but now it's white to play. And so that's initiative. They have the tempo move here. Plays rook cf3, pressuring my bishop, pressuring the pawn. Here I have to find bishop g5 defending this, which gives h4 attacking my bishop, which now I have to find knight e5 right on time. Kind of crazy. All whilst this knight is hanging since 1985. And if you take here, I take. And if you take, I take, and I win, because I'm up the exchange, and your attack leads to nothing. Let's say you move your knight out of the way, then I take this. And if you take back, the f4 square is freed now. My bishop is not uncomfortable. Bishop f4, save my bishop, defended by the queen, eliminate counterplay of this rook. Let's say knight e2, bishop e5, defending f6. The knight e2 pressured the bishop a second time. I had to move it, and now everything holds. Like, variation go crazy, but I took the knight very quickly, actually. Rook takes g3, and then queen e5. So that's the idea of taking. Like, I have a pawn up, so I trade queens, I hop into an endgame, and we're sailing. We're smooth sailing. So my opponent trades. If I take with the knight, my pawns here will not last the day, because the doubling of these rooks will just make f6 impossible to defend. And so that's why I came up with this. But it's actually a mistake. It's a mistake because knight e5 is so strong that this rook would have to reroute to China, come back to Europe, and then go to North America to then attack f6, and by that time, I have my hands all in the grease of this position. So, queen takes, f takes. Knight c5 ting. Rook d4, activate the rook. I took a long time here because I thought they were gonna attack a6. And I came up with this whole line, like knight takes, rook here, rook a3, and then the rook and knight are tied. Rook takes. My opponent hits me with rook gf3, like 15 moves of calculation down the drain. And I'm actually in trouble here because f7 is not hanging, but e6 is. I come up with the only move really. Or no, knight d8. It's a super passive move. Like, my rook is chained to the ground, to the 8th rank, to the f8 and e8 squares. And it's just purely defending. Like, I'm defending everything. Good news though, is that in this defense, it frees my rook. Now, my rook can't do everything, can't venture around the world, but small steps, my friends. g5. And this was such a BS plan. I calculated everything, and I calculated variations of the calculations. I calculated sacrifices. I calculated everything for him. Nothing worked. And so when you do that, rook f6, very good move. When you do that, you can just call the bluff. So this h4 plan, h4, h5, I just call the bluff. I get away completely from the pin, and in fact, just attack this knight. In this calculation, I did not factor in h6 check. I only saw rook c2 in this variation, and then I saw knight b7 does not work to knight takes e6 check, discovered attack on my rook, discovered double attack actually. And I'm forced to take back, and now I lose everything. I lose the house. The thing is, you guys, my opponent messed up without me knowing. So after rook c7, h6 check is a blunder. Because rook g8, king g8, sorry, rook c2, you have to defend this knight, otherwise I win the pawn. Free and like counterattacks galore on g4. If I pick up g5, I pick up h6, over. Forcing this, the knight doesn't have knight e6 check, which means I now have knight b7 to win the knight. But I didn't factor my king on g8 in. And I play this move. With 9 minutes left on the clock, I play rook takes e4. And literally it took me 30 seconds after. Did I miss knight b7? Second time of this game. Did I miss g4 earlier on? Did I miss knight b7? Indeed I did. And it haunted me for the rest of the game. Knight takes, and rook f2. Now, it may seem that I'm 2 pawns up, but the reality of this is that I'm very much suffering in this endgame because of these 2 really nice pawns. If I, let's say, go back with this rook, my king is chained to this ground. So then knight f6 check, I have to defend my pawn on h7, king here, and then rook d2, and this rook is swooping in. And I mean, my rook can't move away, my knight can't move that much because of rook d7, and just like winning. Knight here, rook e7 threatening mate. I mean, it's horrendous. Like, I have to give up the f7 pawn and then mate. So this endgame seemed terrible to me, which is why I traded, and there's still knight f6 coming in. Like, I have to be very, very precise. Knight f6, my king would be chained here, and then my king, okay, let's say I just play like knight c6, which is, this is the example I gave on the stream right after the game. Knight f6, king h8. My king is literally in a prison cell in an endgame. Like, when there's fewer pieces on the board, my king managed to trap himself. So this is extremely stressful. Added to the fact that it's 0-rated opponent, and that if I lose this, it's pretty bad for my tournament. So I take here, and then I come up with a magical move. Fairies, diamonds, gold have this move in common. F. Okay, this is the only slightly advantageous move. I'm proud of this move. I'm very proud of this move because you guys know me from Twitch or from YouTube. If you've seen any of my videos of me playing, I'm not an endgame guy. I don't get into endgames. I don't play for the endgame. I don't love particularly endgames. But this tournament, I'm 3 for 3 in good endgames. But this is the type of endgame that's in a study book. 4 minutes on the clock on my 40th move. After I play this, I can get off my chair because I get bonus 30 minutes time. And this is the idea. I'm allowing you to take my pawn, but this deflects your pawn off to the defense of h6. I'm also pressuring your knight, but now knight f6 check is not as sweet as before, because if I go king h8, yes, my king is locked in, but now your knight is off of e4, and I have liberated the f7 square. So now I'm threatening knight f7 to attack the pawn on g5 that is weakened, and your knight can't defend it because I take up e4. Like, the knight can't go back to defend, can't do anything to defend. So who has to defend it? The king has to march over. And now the king gets here in time, and now I have e4. Like, and now I have 3 pawns that are passed, and will make this king's life miserable until it has to commit to defend this. And now I can even play, well, I would have played b5 here to take up this square and just re-threaten this. And then the king has to go back, and then I would have taken here, come back, and taken here. So f5 has this as the main variation. And if you take en passant, which is what was played, and is the only move if you want to try to hold this as white, I've liberated the f7 square for knight f7. And now we're attacking the weak h6 pawn. And your pawn on f6 is overextended. The only problem with this endgame is that these 2 pawns are not ideal for being 2 pawns up. So I need to absolutely liberate this h-pawn if I want chances of winning. a3 takes, knight d6. I all calculated this for a long time, but basically knight d6 attacks my pawn, and I basically acknowledge that I have to give a pawn up. So if I go b4, my opponent can actually not take here and go a4. And now I'm scared of losing a5. I didn't go with that. I went with knight f5 and give a pawn on b5. So this is where white has drawing chances and even winning chances. I have to be very careful here. Why? Because there's a 2-on-1 here, and if they convert it, they convert a 2-on-1 and have a passed pawn, that pawn can be very dangerous. For example, you might think that knight d4, that knight d4 would win back the pawn. The only thing is, this wins for white after b4. And here, my king can stop this pawn here on b4 because I'm in the square. But when my king gets too close, f7 comes in, and this dead pawn on f6 actually brings in the win tongue ties my king and lets for b8 coming in. So I can't play just anything. So here instead I just fetch the pawn, knight d6, takes, and my knight has to have a square to stop this pawn fully. So that square is b7. I just chose it. If my knight is on that square, the pawn cannot march through, and the knight cannot attack my knight. So I just take this pawn, and now b5. I keep my knight on d6 as much as possible, because if I go to b7, the knight is just not a strong piece anymore. And here, keeping it in the center, making a wall against this king is really, really useful. Now I go e4, because mainly on the obvious move king e3, which my opponent played terribly here, I have king e5, which is amazing. And now you can't push b6 to try to push b7 to try to win this, because I have knight c4 check winning the pawn on b6. So now I'm kind of happy that I saw this. And so what do you do here? Do you do a knight move giving the pawn? You have to move your king. And now I gain a substantial amount of space. And that's good, not only for my passed pawn, it's also good to fetch this pawn, because now with the king laying back, I can have a 2 against 1, king and knight against knight, and win the pawn. The only thing is, I need to win this pawn and keep this one on e4. So king d4, knight check, king back. I calculated that if king here, it's still winning for black, but it's kind of not easy. Knight c3, now I go knight c4, the other variation. The king moves and now king d4. What this does is that it forces the knight to a4, yes, to push the pawn, but after king here, just a waiting move, I think. Oh no, yeah, I just blundered this, so I just have to go back once again. I go e5. After e5, b6. We're back at the hotel, finishing off this endgame. Okay, so I go knight d6, which is a great move. I'm taking up the b7 square so that this pawn cannot move anymore. And so my opponent just goes with king d2 here. This is a huge problematic move for the white pieces. Although it says excellent move here, it's because white has like no moves. And so this king move I really detest, because let's say the knight goes to c3 and liberates itself from, you know, just being on the rim of the board. Now I can go knight c4 check and then win the pawn here on b6. And knight b2 is still like not really a good move, because I think I can just go here and take, and now my pawns form a really nice wall. Okay, yeah, so king d2, h5, and now knight c3. And this is the blunder of the game in my opinion, because now the knight is off the protection of the b6 square, and this is why this king move I'm so against, because it just lets for knight c4 things. And now I win the pawn. And here, this is now a completely winning endgame. But yeah, after knight e2, king e3, knight g3, and I thought I had blundered. So here, my king's on e3, and this pawn is attacked, right? And if I move this h-pawn, knight check forks my king and pawn, and I lose a pawn. And on paper, this looks like it's getting to a draw, but in reality, it's just completely winning after king f2, knight takes. And this is the 2 diagonal square move or rule. If your king is 2 diagonal squares away from this knight, the knight would need 3 moves to check your king. But I played this with the same idea. If you take here as king f3, by the way, same idea. I just go e3, e2, e1, queens, wins. Very hard for this knight to come between that. But here this just gives the e4 pawn, which I had completely missed. Luckily, it's still completely winning. So I go like king f3, I just chase the knight until there's no checks, and then I hike my h4 pawn. And what this does is kind of the fox and the chicken coop technique, is that your pieces have to come off of this control of this square on e4, so that my pawn will be liberated. And now once the knight is back and I just move my knight around, these pieces are constrained to the defense of this e4 and h4 pawns that are hiking up the board. So yeah, these passive pieces, look, if this knight could trade itself against these 2 pawns, it's drawing. But because they are both unique in their own way, very far apart, and very stable, this is completely winning for black. So check, king g3, I just avoid checks, and then I go knight f6. Very important to take up the square and the pawn. And after king f1, I just go h3 and hike my pawn down the board. Here, white still has drawing resources, which is crazy. King f1, and if I go king f3, knight h1 to just, you know, play a move, e3, and I have to be careful on knight f2 to not play too quick and take this knight, because that would be a stalemate. And I had seen this during the game, thankfully. Here I can just play something like check. King here, and then knight here. If you take my knight, I just have queens. If you go like knight here, I can go king here, knight here, and then this. Check, knight takes, and then knight d2, and you can't stop mate. So I'm not that mean, obviously that didn't happen. But yeah, my opponent went king h1 in this position, blundering the knight, and he thought this was stalemate, but then he realized it wasn't, and then just gave out his hand. And now I have 3.5 out of 6. Tomorrow I'm playing a WIM from India. So see you soon. Thank you so much for watching, and sending you a ton of love.